He lifted his champagne flute, and the chandelier light fractured through the crystal like a prism. 300 guests turned toward my son's new father-in-law as he rose from the head table, and I sat very still in my chair near the back of the ballroom, my right hand wrapped around something small and warm in my jacket pocket. I had been waiting 23 years for this exact moment. I was ready. My name is Maggie Wells. Most people call me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and I spent the better part of my adult life as a licensed practical nurse in Greenfield, Ohio, a town that smells like river water and diesel, and the particular kind of stubborn hope that working people carry in their chests like a second heartbeat. I know what it costs to keep a person alive. I also know what it costs when someone decides a life isn't worth protecting. The man at the head table with the practiced smile and the Italian suit, I knew that cost too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. It was February, 23 years ago. I had pot roast warming in the oven and a 9-month-old son asleep in the next room when the phone rang at 11:14 at night. My husband Thomas worked the evening shift at Hargrove Chemical, a processing plant 12 miles outside Greenfield. He'd been there 6 years. Steady work, decent pay, benefits that covered our little family the way a good roof covers a house. That was how Thomas talked about his job: solid, necessary, dependable. He was the same way himself. The voice on the phone belonged to a woman from the plant's main office. She told me there had been an incident. She told me to come to the facility. She did not tell me my husband was already gone. I don't remember the drive. I remember standing outside a chain-link perimeter fence with 15 other women while orange emergency lights strobed against the February sky. And I remember the smell, something chemical and sharp that coated the inside of my nose and stayed there for days. The main processing building had partially collapsed. A pressure valve in the secondary mixing unit had failed catastrophically. The official word, delivered by a man in a hard hat standing on the bumper of a company truck, was that it appeared to be an equipment malfunction. 4 men died that night. Thomas was the youngest at 31. Our son Daniel was 9 months old. He had Thomas's ears and Thomas's habit of grabbing onto your finger with both hands and refusing to let go. The company paid out settlements. A letter arrived from Hargrove Chemical's legal team expressing deep condolences and explaining the terms. I signed the papers because Daniel needed diapers, and I needed to keep the lights on, and grief doesn't pause for practicalities. But before I signed, I did something that would matter 23 years later. I called Thomas's supervisor, a man named Gerald who'd worked alongside my husband and who showed up at the funeral with red eyes and a handshake that lasted too long. I asked him directly whether the pressure valve failure was truly unexpected. Gerald looked at the floor for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, that Thomas had filed a written safety report 6 weeks before the explosion, flagging concerns about the valve system in the secondary unit. Gerald said the report had gone to plant management. He said he didn't know what happened to it after that. I thanked him. I went home. I put Daniel to sleep. And then I sat at our kitchen table and held Thomas's pocket watch, a silver Hamilton he'd inherited from his own father, engraved on the back in small, careful letters, "Every minute counts." His hands had wound it every morning for 6 years. His hands that would never hold our son. I made a decision that night. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I would be. The early years were survival, pure and simple. My mother watched Daniel while I worked double shifts at Greenfield General. I came home smelling like antiseptic with aching feet and a child who needed a bath and a story and a mother who had enough left in her to provide both. Most nights I managed. Some nights I sat on the bathroom floor after he fell asleep and let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes, then got up and made his lunch for the next day. Daniel was 5 when he first asked about his father. We were in the backyard, and he'd found an old photo in a shoebox, Thomas in his work coveralls, squinting into the sun, laughing at something off camera. "Who's that?" he asked. I sat down in the grass beside him. I told him about his father, about the way Thomas whistled while he cooked breakfast, always slightly off-key, about how he could fix anything mechanical with patience and the right wrench, about how he used to wind the pocket watch every single morning and set it on the kitchen counter while he made coffee. I went inside and brought the watch out. Let Daniel hold it. He turned it over in his small hands and read the inscription slowly, sounding out the words. "Every minute counts," he said. "That's right." "What does that mean?" I thought about it. It means don't waste time on things that aren't true. Don't waste time on things that don't matter. And never, ever let someone convince you that the minutes of your life are worth less than theirs. He held on to that watch for the rest of the afternoon. The years moved the way years do, when you're too busy to watch them closely fast and then suddenly gone. Daniel in Little League, Daniel in the school play, Daniel on the honor roll 3 years running. I picked up weekend shifts, doing home health visits. I clipped coupons. We took one vacation, a long weekend in Gatlinburg when he was 12, and he still talks about it. By the time he was in high school, he could look at a piece of machinery and tell you what was wrong with it the way his father could. The gift passed down without ever being taught. He applied to Ohio State, got in on a partial scholarship. I filled out every financial aid form I could find and took out a small loan and told him to go. He studied environmental engineering. He called every Sunday. In his junior year, he told me he wanted to work on industrial safety compliance, making sure chemical plants met their regulatory obligations, making sure what happened to his father couldn't happen to anyone else's father. I sat in my car in a hospital parking lot after that phone call and let myself cry for longer than 10 minutes. Graduation day, I sat in the stadium in a yellow sundress I'd bought secondhand and watched my son walk across that stage and thought, "Thomas, look what we built." Daniel went to work for an environmental consulting firm in Columbus. He was good at it, the kind of thorough and methodical that comes from being raised by a nurse who checked twice and documented everything. He called one Sunday evening in early autumn, about 18 months ago now, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, lighter somehow, like something wound too tight had finally eased. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you about someone." Her name was Claudia. They'd met at a regulatory conference in Cincinnati. "She was smart," he said. "She worked in corporate philanthropy. She laughed at the same things he did." He'd known her 4 months, and he was already talking like a man who'd made up his mind about something. "I want you to meet her," he said. "I really think she's it, Mom." My chest filled with something warm and complicated. This was what I'd worked for. This was the point of all of it, my son, grown and happy, building something of his own. "Tell me everything," I said. He talked for 20 minutes. And then, near the end, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned her last name. "Her family's from Dayton originally," he said. "Her father runs an energy and chemicals company, Hargrove Industries. Her name is Claudia Hargrove." I was standing at my kitchen window. Outside, the neighbor's maple was turning orange. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening in September. "Hargrove. Mom? You there?" "I'm here," I said. "Tell me more about her." I stayed on the phone another 10 minutes. I said all the right things. After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time without moving. There was more than one Hargrove family in Ohio? Of course there was. Common enough name. I made myself type it into the search bar slowly, deliberately, the way I approach any piece of information that might be bad news. Claudia Hargrove, Dayton, Ohio. LinkedIn profile. Clean and professional. Corporate giving director. University of Dayton graduate. And below that, daughter of Edward Hargrove, chairman and CEO of Hargrove Industries, formerly Hargrove Chemical. Formerly Hargrove Chemical. The same Hargrove Chemical where Thomas Wells filed a safety report about a pressure valve 6 weeks before it failed and killed 4 men. I closed the laptop. I opened it again. I searched for Edward Hargrove and found a press photo from a charity gala, silver-haired, square-jawed, the kind of expensive smile that costs more than most people earn in a month. He was standing with a young woman I recognized from Claudia's profile photo. Same cheekbones. His hand on her shoulder. I searched his son next. Marcus Hargrove, 34, worked in real estate development in Columbus. Different field from his father. His face in photos looked like a man trying to be somewhere else. I sat with the information for 3 days before I did anything with it. I went to work. I checked vital signs and administered medications and held the hands of people who were frightened. I thought about Thomas's safety report, about the word incident, about the settlement papers I'd signed with Daniel on my hip, On the fourth day, I drove to the county records office and submitted a public records request for everything available on the original investigation into the Hargrove chemical explosion. Then, I contacted a journalist. Her name was Patricia Osei. She wrote for the Columbus Dispatch and had spent 3 years covering corporate environmental violations across Ohio. We'd met once at a community meeting about water quality in Greenfield. She'd struck me as someone who didn't stop pulling a thread just because it was uncomfortable. I called her on a Thursday. She agreed to meet. Over the next 6 weeks, Patricia and I built what I should have built 23 years ago, except I had been 29 years old with a 9-month-old baby and no money and a grief so heavy I couldn't always stand up straight beneath it. Now, I was 61 years old, and I had Thomas's watch in my pocket, and I knew exactly how to read documentation, and how to follow a paper trail, and how to recognize when numbers had been manipulated. The county records gave us the original incident report, which had been amended twice. The first version, filed within 48 hours of the explosion, contained a footnote referencing an internal safety concern raised by an employee in the secondary processing unit. By the third version, that footnote was gone. Patricia found the first version on microfiche at the Greenfield Public Library, where it had apparently been sitting for 23 years without anyone looking for it. Thomas's name was in the footnote. I held the photocopy of that page and felt something shift in my chest, a gear that had been grinding for 2 decades finally catching. Gerald, Thomas's old supervisor, was retired now and living in Findlay. He agreed to talk. He'd kept copies of things he probably shouldn't have kept, Thomas's original written safety report, a memo from plant management acknowledging its receipt, and a second memo, 2 weeks later, noting that the recommended maintenance had been declined due to scheduled production timelines and cost considerations. Both memos bore Edward Hargrove's initials at the bottom, E.H., like a mark. Patricia found the cost documentation. Delaying the valve maintenance had saved Hargrove Chemical approximately $180,000 in that quarter. 4 men had died. 23 families had received settlements averaging $45,000 each. By any arithmetic that mattered, Edward Hargrove had calculated that the math worked in his favor. I won't tell you I wasn't angry. I was. But it was the cold, purposeful kind of anger, the kind that makes you precise instead of reckless. I had been a nurse for 30 years. I had learned that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is panic. You breathe. You assess. You act. Then Patricia found something that changed the temperature of everything. "Maggie," she said, her voice carefully neutral in the way that means bad news is coming. "You need to look at this." She'd found regulatory filings from Hargrove Industries' current operations, a plastics processing facility in Zanesville, that had been flagged twice in the last 2 years for pressure system irregularities. The same category of violation. The same pattern of delayed maintenance, deferred costs, optimistic safety assessments, signed off by a compliance officer whose salary came directly from Hargrove. Someone was going to get hurt in Zanesville. It was a matter of when. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel came to see me. He drove up from Columbus on a Saturday morning, and when he sat down at the kitchen table, I recognized the expression on his face because I'd worn it myself once, the look of someone carrying something too heavy to keep holding alone. "I know about you and Patricia Osei," he said. I set down my coffee cup. "How?" Claudia told me. Her father told her. He rubbed his face. "He knows you've been asking questions. He knows about the records request." I waited. "He told Claudia that you're trying to sabotage the wedding, that you can't let go of the past and you're making it her problem." Daniel looked at me. I didn't believe him. "But I need you to tell me what's actually happening." So I told him. Everything. The footnote, Thomas's safety report, Gerald's copies, the Zanesville facility. The $180,000 in deferred maintenance weighed against 4 men's lives. Daniel sat quietly for a long time after I finished. His hands were flat on the table, very still, and I watched him the way I had watched him since he was 9 months old, learning him, reading him. "He killed my father," he said finally. Not a question. His choices did. That's the same thing. I didn't argue. "Does Claudia know?" he asked. "I don't know what she knows." He nodded slowly. "I need to think." He stood, then stopped. "Mom, You should have told me sooner. I know. I held his gaze. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to take something from you. He drove back to Columbus without saying goodbye. That hurt in the particular way that only your children can hurt you, right down to the foundation. 3 days later, someone knocked on my door at 7 in the evening. I opened it to find a man I recognized from photographs. Marcus Hargrove, Claudia's brother. He was shorter than he looked online, and his face had the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to keep his expressions managed. "Mrs. Wells," he said, "I know you have no reason to trust me. I'm asking for 20 minutes. He sat at the same kitchen table where I'd sat the night Thomas died. He had a folder with him. "My father knows your investigation is further along than he initially thought," Marcus said. "He's moving to consolidate." He opened the folder. Last week, he had his attorney file amended regulatory documentation for the Zanesville facility, listing a new compliance officer. "Her name is Claudia Hargrove." He turned a page toward me. "She didn't sign these. I watched him have someone forge her signature, the same way he's done before, twice, that I know of, when he needed someone to absorb liability that would otherwise land on him. My hands were very steady. I had held them steady through worse. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've known what kind of man my father is since I was 12 years old." Marcus clasped the folder. "Because Claudia doesn't know. She thinks he's just a difficult man who loves her in his way. She doesn't know he's been using her name." He pushed the folder toward me. "And because there's a facility in Zanesville with the same pressure system problems as Hargrove Chemical in 2001, and people are working there right now." I picked up the folder. "This doesn't make us allies." "No," he said. "It makes me someone who's trying not to be complicit anymore." He stood to leave. "I'm sorry about your husband, Mrs. Wells. I was 11 when it happened. I didn't understand then what my father had done. By the time I did understand, I didn't know how to say so. After he left, I called Patricia. Then I called Gerald. Then I sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's pocket watch open in my palm, the small, steady tick of it marking time the way it always had, and I thought about 23 years of minutes, and what they had cost, and what they had built. The wedding was in May, at a restored event hall in downtown Columbus. 300 guests, white flowers everywhere, the kind of extravagance that doesn't embarrass people with money. I sat at a table near the back with Patricia, who was there as my guest, and also as someone with a press badge and a recorder in her bag. Marcus was seated 2 tables over. We had not spoken at the reception. We did not need to. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel standing at the altar with his father's pocket watch in his vest pocket. He'd asked to borrow it, and I'd pressed it into his hand that morning without speaking, because sometimes there aren't words that are adequate. Claudia walking toward him in a dress the color of heavy cream. She looked luminous and terrified, and I couldn't tell which of those things was louder in her face. Our eyes met as she passed my row. She looked away first. Dinner service. The usual formal choreography of a wealthy wedding, multiple courses, attentive staff, the comfortable conversation of people who don't worry about the bill. I ate without tasting anything. Patricia nursed a sparkling water and watched the room. Then the servers cleared the plates, and the room quieted in anticipation, and Edward Hargrove stood. He was everything I had expected from the photographs. Silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who has spent decades being right in every room he entered. He raised his champagne glass and let the silence build like he'd practiced it. "I want to speak tonight about what it means to build something that lasts," he said, and his voice carried easily across the hall. "My family has built things in this state for 3 generations. We've provided jobs, supported communities, created opportunity." His eyes swept the room and paused, for just a fraction of a second, on me. Claudia was raised to understand that stability comes from strength, from the right foundations, from belonging to a family with the resources and the standing to weather any storm. Several guests shifted. Someone near the front coughed lightly. "I'll be honest," he continued, and the word honest landed wrong in the room, the way it does when it's being used as a weapon. "I worried about this match. My daughter is marrying a fine young man. No question. But Daniel comes from modest circumstances." Another pause. "His mother raised him largely on her own, a nurse. Hard-working, I'm sure. But there are limits to what one person can provide. And I think we're all glad that Claudia and the Hargrove name can offer Daniel and his future family something more substantial. The table nearest to me went completely silent. Someone at the head table I couldn't see who made a small, sharp sound. I stood. The scrape of my chair in the sudden quiet was soft, but it carried. Conversations died, heads turned. Edward Hargrove looked at me with an expression that was almost amusement, the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Mr. Hargrove," I said. My voice was level and clear. I'd spent 30 years speaking to frightened people in calm voices, and it turned out that skill had other applications. "You mentioned foundations." "Mrs. Wells." A slight, dismissive nod. "I've spent my career in healthcare. We have something in common with engineering. We understand that a system's failure points are usually known before the failure happens. The question is always whether someone decides to act on that knowledge." I reached into my jacket pocket and closed my fingers around Thomas's watch. "Not yet, just held it." My husband Thomas understood that. He understood it well enough that 6 weeks before he died in your plant, he filed a written safety report documenting exactly what was wrong with the pressure valve system in the secondary unit. The room temperature changed. "He gave that report to plant management," I continued. "To you, Mr. Hargrove. There are 2 memos acknowledging receipt of that report. There is also a memo authorizing the deferral of recommended maintenance to protect that quarter's production numbers. All 3 memos bear your initials." I nodded toward the far end of the room. A screen that had been displaying wedding photos went dark, then lit with the first document, Thomas's safety report, his handwriting visible, his signature at the bottom. "The decision to defer that maintenance saved Hargrove Chemical approximately $180,000, I said. 4 men died. Their families received settlements averaging $45,000 each. The incident report was amended twice to remove any reference to the prior safety concern. The next slide, the original incident report with Thomas's name in the footnote, then the amended version with the footnote gone. Gerald Pruitt kept copies of all of it. He's prepared to testify. Edward Hargrove's champagne glass was still raised. Slowly, he lowered it. "And then," I said, "there's Zanesville." Patricia stood at the back of the room. On her signal, the screen changed to the regulatory filings for the Zanesville facility, the pressure system irregularities, the delayed maintenance reports, the signature on the compliance documentation. "My daughter's signature," I said, "is on documents she never saw and never signed. The same pattern 23 years later. Except this time, the liability lands on Claudia Hargrove rather than on you." The room erupted. Not all at once, in waves. Shock first, then voices, then the scraping of chairs, and somewhere near the center of the hall, the sound of a woman crying. Edward Hargrove's voice cut through the noise. "This is fabricated. This is a grieving woman who has never accepted." "Patricia," I said it quietly. Patricia stood. "I'm Patricia Osei from the Columbus Dispatch. The full documentation, the original safety reports, the maintenance deferral memos, the amended incident reports, and the Zanesville regulatory filings, including the forged signatures, has been provided to the Ohio EPA, the State Attorney General's Office, and OSHA as of this morning. Mr. Hargrove, do you want to tell 300 guests what fabrication looks like, or would you like to address the substance?" 2 men I didn't recognize moved toward Edward Hargrove from the side of the room. One of them showed him something, a phone, a badge. I couldn't tell which. His face, which had been flushed and furious, went the color of old plaster. The last slide on the screen was Thomas's photograph. His work photo. The one from his employee file that I'd obtained through the records request. 31 years old, squinting slightly, not quite smiling. Below it, 1 line. Thomas Wells, the 14th of February, 2001. Every minute counts. I didn't watch them lead Edward Hargrove toward the lobby. I was watching my son. Daniel stood at the head table with his hands at his sides, very still, looking at his father's face on the screen. Then he turned and found me, and I saw something move through his expression that I hadn't seen before, grief and relief arriving at the same time, the way they sometimes do when the truth is finally heavier than the silence was. Claudia had her face in her hands. I made my way through the crowd to the head table. People stepped aside without being asked. Daniel reached me first and held on without saying anything, and I put my hand on the back of his head the way I had when he was a child, and we stood like that for a moment while the room rearranged itself around us. Then he pulled back. He looked at Claudia. "She needs to explain," he said quietly, "and I think you need to hear it." An hour later, in a private room upstairs with the noise of the reception filtering through the walls, Claudia sat across from me in her wedding dress with her mascara tracked down her face, and she told me about the lunch. 3 weeks before the wedding, her father had invited her to a restaurant. Private room, the kind where business gets done without witnesses. He'd had a folder. He'd laid out documents, regulatory filings for the Zanesville facility, all of them bearing her signature, and bank records for a Hargrove Industries subsidiary account that listed her as a responsible party. She'd told him she'd never signed those documents. He'd said, "Prove it." Then he'd told her what he needed. At the reception, he was going to make a toast. He would say things about my son's mother, things designed to diminish me, to reframe the entire story of Thomas's death as something I needed to move past, rather than something that demanded justice. And Claudia would sit beside her new husband and smile and say nothing. If she refused, if she raised her voice, if she defended me, if she made any kind of scene, he would send the Zanesville documentation to every regulatory body in Ohio, with her name attached to all of it. Her career would end. Her reputation would be destroyed, and he would find a way to complicate Daniel's professional standing as well. He said it was one evening, Claudia said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He said if I just let him handle it, he'd protect us both. He said that was what family loyalty meant. I sat across from her and let her words settle. "I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he'd stop," she said. "I thought I could protect Daniel by controlling the damage." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Your father taught you that silence is protection. It isn't. Silence is exactly what people like your father need to survive." Her face crumpled. "I should have told Daniel." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She looked up. "Can you forgive me?" I thought about Thomas's watch. About 23 years. About all the things I had kept quiet because I thought I wasn't strong enough to carry them into the light. "I kept silent for 23 years, I said. "I told myself it was for Daniel's sake, that I was protecting him from something too painful. I was wrong too." I paused. "That doesn't erase what you did, but it means I understand it." She waited. "Forgiveness isn't something I can give you tonight," I said. "What I can tell you is that we're going to find out whether we're capable of it." Daniel appeared in the doorway. He'd been standing there for some of it. I'd heard the door open. He crossed to where Claudia was sitting and kneeled in front of her and took her hands, and I looked away to give them privacy. Marcus knocked softly and entered. He stood near the wall, keeping a careful distance. He looked at me once, and I nodded once, and that was the whole of our communication. Before I left, I took Thomas's pocket watch from my pocket and held it for a moment. Then I walked to where my son was kneeling beside his wife and pressed the watch into his hand. "Your father carried this every day," I said. "He believed every minute counted. Don't waste them." I walked out of the hotel through a side entrance and drove home to Greenfield in the dark with the radio off. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of things I'd finally said out loud. That was 2 years ago. The adjustment was slow and imperfect, the way real things are. Daniel and I found our footing again after about 6 months, slowly, carefully, with some conversations that were hard on both of us. He told me he wished I'd told him sooner. I told him he was right. We sat with that for a while. Claudia and I were slower. She sent a letter, 3 pages long, 4 months after the wedding. Not an apology exactly, more of an accounting. What she had known, what she had chosen, what she understood now about the difference. I read it 3 times and wrote back. We wrote letters for a while before we spoke on the phone. We spoke on the phone for a while before we met in person. She quit her position at Hargrove Industries the week after the reception and hasn't been back. She works for a nonprofit now, occupational safety advocacy. She says she chose it deliberately. Edward Hargrove's trial is ongoing. Gerald's testimony was solid. The Ohio Attorney General's office has been thorough. The Zanesville facility was shut down for inspection within 72 hours of the reception and hasn't reopened. Marcus testified against his father. He and I have not become close. We are something more careful and more honest than that two people who made different choices at different times and are trying to account for them accurately. Last spring, Daniel called to tell me Claudia was pregnant. I sat down at the kitchen table and breathed. I said all the right things. After I hung up, I sat with the quiet for a little while. Their daughter was born in November. They named her June Simple, bright, the name of a good month. Daniel brought her to Greenfield when she was 6 weeks old, and I held her in my kitchen while the winter light came through the window, and she gripped my finger with both hands the way her grandfather used to. Claudia sat across the table and watched me hold her daughter, and we didn't say much. We didn't need to. Some things are communicated better by presence than by words. I keep Thomas's watch on the kitchen counter now, the way he used to. Every morning I wind it and set it down beside my coffee. I let the sound of it mark the morning small, steady, precise. Here's what I've learned from 23 years and one wedding reception. Silence is not the same as strength. I told myself for 2 decades that I was being patient, being strategic, protecting my son from something painful. The truth was simpler and harder than that. I was afraid. Afraid that the truth wasn't enough. Afraid that a widow with a baby and a folded safety report wasn't a match for a man with money and lawyers and the power to define what counted as an accident. I was wrong about that. I wish I'd found out sooner. Claudia was afraid too. She made the wrong choice for reasons I understand completely, because I made the same choice for 23 years. I don't say that to excuse her. I say it because the path from afraid to honest is long and specific, and no one should be too proud to walk it. Edward Hargrove taught his daughter that loyalty meant obedience, that love meant compliance, that staying quiet was the same as keeping people safe. Every lesson he gave her was the wrong one. Thomas taught me something different without knowing it. He put his name on a safety report that he knew might cost him his job and filed it anyway, because there were other men working in that building and their minutes mattered too. He didn't survive to see whether it made a difference. But he put his name on it. He showed up. I think about that every morning when I wind the watch. Every minute counts. Not the ones you spend protecting the wrong things, the ones you spend telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. The ones you spend building something that can actually hold weight. We're trying. Some days that's enough. Most days, it has to be. Drop a 2 in the comments if you made it here. Tell me where you're watching from. This story is fictional, but the truth inside it isn't. Not the part about silence, and not the part about what it costs. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.